Okay, so the friend I mentioned in my post is on the line, and her name is Shalise. If you read my blog, Brassy Apple, then you know Shalise from last year, our series, Refactoring Your Life. She is going to share her experience with it with her daughter. She has also taken it herself, and she has a lot of knowledge. So I'm going to turn the time over to her. Welcome, Shalise.
So first of all, I'm just going to tell you guys how I found Laminine and what it's done, and then tell you all I've learned about it and the effects of it and how it works on the brain. So I have been, we've had our daughter, Bailey, on Laminine for 2.5 years. When one day I got a phone call that I needed to come up to the school when she was in 1st grade, and they were in a pure panic. When I got up there, they had just done hearing tests, and my daughter completely failed 100%, and we were confused at what had happened. Well, long story short, our little cutie pie had learned how to lip read, and we had no idea that she could not hear. But so this was on a Wednesday. We took her to a doctor the next day, which was a Thursday, and they did emergency surgery on her, which was what happened is she had a thing called, she had a conductive hearing loss, not a cochlear hearing loss. A cochlear loss is where you're missing the parts that goes from the ear to the brain. Bailey didn't have that. What she had was a conductive loss where her eardrums had reversed, and she could not hear. So they went in, reversed her eardrums, and put implants in her ears, and then gave her hearing aids. She had heard higher decibels, which everybody has 5 decibels of hearing. The top 3 of them are like female voices and high pitches. The 2 lower ones are usually male voices and really low tones. We'd learned that she never heard my husband's voice. So that was really hard because when she heard his voice for the first time, she didn't even recognize it. But she cried because she knew that she could hear him. And then what happened was something that we didn't expect. So somebody that gets hearing in the 1st grade or later in life, they have to relearn vocabulary. So here is a 1st grader, and she doesn't understand half the words we're saying because they were so muffled because of such her extreme loss that she had to relearn basic vocabulary. Well, then what they found out is the part of her brain with retention and comprehension was misfiring. And they told us that she would never be normal, never be up to par. She would always struggle. She would never be able to focus. Her brain just would constantly misfire. And that she could learn, and she would learn at a slow rate, but she was going to be considered special ed. And that just didn't make a lot of sense to me because I'm like, well, she can learn this vocabulary and she can learn a little bit. Well, why can't she learn at a normal rate? And I didn't take that for an answer. That just didn't make sense to me. So I started to research, actually started to research cochlear loss, which deals with the connection in the brain. And I learned a lot about the brain. So one day, when one of my clients who has a little boy with cerebral palsy, and that's dealing with the cerebellum in the brain, she came to me and said, I found this stuff called Laminine. I have prayed about it. She's like, what do you think about it for my little son that has cerebral palsy? At the time, he couldn't walk, and he couldn't even hold like a crayon in his hand, and he was about 4.5, almost 5. And I said everything that I could research on it. I said, well, it sounds interesting, all my understanding of the brain and of the hypothalamus in the brain and the pituitary gland that I had learned. It started to make sense that it could maybe help her son with the lack of the cerebellum in the brain, that maybe it could help the brain to quit misfiring so much and start to heal itself. Well, after 6 months, well, not even 6 months, 4 months of her little boy being on it, he was walking and he was holding a pencil, and he still has the shapes and stuff. And I don't remember the timeline after that. Right after I had revisited her, that first time after she started him on it, which had been about 4 months, I put my daughter Bailey on Laminine. So that's been about 2.5 years ago. So with little Jackson, he is now in mainstream school. He just had his scans done, redone. They were hoping that the Laminine would regrow the brain tissue, and I told them it wouldn't. I said, all my research, I know what it'll do is it'll make the receptors in the brain come on, and sure enough, what it had done with his brain activity, what it did is make the receptors activate, and then the receptors created new connections in the brain. So even though it was missing part of the cerebellum, it didn't matter. The brain fixed itself. It found new pathways. And so he now plays soccer, he runs, he plays like a normal kid. He is on an IEP, which is a little bit of extra help in school, but he's mainstream school. And then with Bailey, she is now out of resource. She's completely caught up to grade level. She has gained all but the smallest decibel of her hearing, and her retention and comprehension is 100% normal, which they told me she would never hit that, according to her testing.